I have to be completely honest with you right out of the gate here. And I mean honest with the listeners joining us for this deep dive too. I very nearly sent this entire stack of research right back to the production team.
Really? I mean, you usually just dive right into whatever they put in front of us. What threw you off this time?
It was literally just the title on the very first paper in the stack. It just said gaslighting. And my immediate knee-jerk reaction was, okay, what are we doing here? Are we doing a true crime show now? Is this a relationship advice segment?
Right. It feels a bit out of left field for us.
Exactly. It felt incredibly small. It felt like something you'd scroll past on TikTok or, a trending buzzword on Twitter. Not the kind of structural macro level stuff we do on this deep dive. I mean, we usually tackle macroeconomics or AI alignment or deep history. This felt like we were drifting into cheap pop psychology.
It's incredibly interesting that you say that, though, because that exact reaction, that instant dismissal, that feeling that the topic is quote-unquote too small or just a buzzword, is actually a perfect real-world example of the exact phenomenon these papers are describing.
Okay, well, that's exactly what hooked me. Because once I actually forced myself to sit down, grab a coffee, and read past the abstract, and specifically that one paper on structural isomorphism, I realized I was completely, utterly wrong about the scope of this entire concept.
We aren't really talking about bad boyfriends or toxic bosses at all, are we?
I mean, we can talk about them, sure. They are definitely part of the data set. But they are just the smallest, most localized example of a much simpler and, frankly, much more terrifying underlying mechanism. Right. And so that brings us to our mission for today's deep dive, as I understand it. We are going to try to prove to you, the listener, that the exact same mechanic that makes a toxic ex-partner manipulate you is the exact same mechanic that causes a massive government bureaucracy to fail. And this is the part that genuinely melted my brain. It's the exact same mechanic that causes an artificial intelligence to hallucinate.
Correct. We are looking for a universal pattern here across all these domains. The researchers in our source material call it coherence preservation.
Coherence preservation. I have to say, that sounds incredibly benign. It sounds like something a librarian does on a Tuesday afternoon.
It definitely sounds benign on paper, but structurally speaking, it can be incredibly violent. It is what happens when a system, and I mean any system, whether it's a human brain, a multinational corporation, or a massive language model, realizes that the truth is simply too expensive to process.
Too expensive in terms of energy, right?
Exactly. When incoming information actively threatens to break the system's internal model of the world, that system has a fundamental choice to make. It can either break its own model to let the truth in, or it can break the truth to save the model.
And that right there is the line that stuck with me the hardest from the reading. Gaslighting is the sound of a system choosing preservation over update.
That's the core thesis.
So we're going to peel this back layer by layer today. We've got 7 specific mechanisms to get through, the actual levers of gaslighting, as the sources call them, and then we're going to apply those levers to institutions, to AI, and eventually to the fundamental structure of reality itself.
It's basically a ladder. We start on the ground with human psychology, and we end up in the clouds with quantum physics and systems theory.
I can't wait. But before we climb that ladder, we really need to clear the air on definitions. The biggest criticism I hear about the term gaslighting is that it's just become a fancy synonym for lying. Or worse, it just means someone disagreed with me on the internet.
Right, and that constant dilution of the term is really unhelpful for our understanding. In this specific research, gaslighting isn't defined by the actual content of the lie. It's defined entirely by the architecture of the interaction.
The architecture. So it's not a spectrum of lying.
No, it is not a single point on a linear spectrum like saying I told a white lie versus I called a massive lie. It is defined as a family of frame control behaviors.
Frame control behaviors. Okay, so we're talking about manipulating the context in which the actual information sits, rather than just changing the facts.
Exactly. Think of it like a cockpit in a commercial airplane. You are the pilot. The plane itself is your worldview. It's your deeply held model of reality. And suddenly, heavy turbulence hits. Contradictory information comes flying in. The plane starts shaking violently.
You're losing altitude.
Right. And you have a dashboard of levers in front of you that you can pull to stabilize that plane.
And these levers aren't truth levers. They're stability levers. They don't care about what's outside the plane. They just want the shaking to stop.
Precisely. You aren't consciously trying to hurt the passengers in the back. You're just trying to keep the plane from literally breaking apart in midair. The sources identify 7 distinct levers in this cockpit. And I think once you see them as mechanical levers, you stop seeing them as just evil personality traits.
Okay, let's walk through this cockpit then. I really want to go through these 7 mechanisms in detail because I think everyone listening to this deep dive will recognize them immediately from their own lives, but they probably just haven't had the structural language to describe exactly how they work.
Let's do it.
So the first one is basically the big red handle on the dashboard, reality denial. This is the flat contradiction, the classic, that didn't occur, or I never said that.
Right. This pulls what the researchers call the memory lever.
But here's where I always get stuck with this one. Isn't this just lying? Like if I steal a cookie from the jar and my mom asks me, and I say I didn't steal the cookie, am I gaslighting my mom?
Not necessarily. If you say, I didn't steal the cookie purely to avoid getting grounded, that's just simple deception. You know you did it. She knows you did it. Reality denial as a structural gaslighting mechanism is entirely about deletion.
Deletion.
Yes, it's about the system refusing to even acknowledge that an input ever existed in the first place because acknowledging its existence would crash the system entirely.
Okay, I think I need a systemic example for that one. Something bigger than the cookie thief.
Think about a computer database. If you try to write a file that explicitly contradicts the operating system's core kernel, like a command that violates its fundamental rules of operation, what does the computer actually do?
It throws a critical error. It just rejects the file entirely. It says write command failed.
Exactly. It doesn't cautiously forget the file or hide it. It actively blocks the write command at the root level to preserve the stability of the entire OS. When a human or a massive institution engages in reality denial, they're effectively blocking the write command to their own internal history.
Wow. So when they say I did not say that, it's not just a lie. It's a literal refusal to let that event become part of the permanent record.
Because if it actually became part of the record, the system would have to reconcile it. And it simply cannot afford the processing power to do that.
It lacks the energy budget. The cost of integrating that truth is too high. So the easiest path is just delete.
Exactly. The memory lever is pulled. Reality is denied.
Okay, that makes total sense. That's lever 1. Now, lever 2 is one that drives me absolutely insane in my personal life. Frame substitution.
Ah, yes, the classic tone police lever.
This is when you go to someone, maybe it's a partner or maybe it's an HR department at work, and you have very real structural complaint. You say, this process is fundamentally broken, or you really hurt my feelings when you did X. And their response isn't about X at all. The response is entirely about how you said it.
You seem very aggressive right now. I really can't talk to you when you're being this emotional. You're being hysterical.
Yes. And suddenly, miraculously, we aren't talking about the broken plumbing or the missed project deadline anymore. We are exclusively talking about my personality flaws.
That is the frame lever in action. They have completely swapped the frame of the conversation. The original frame you brought was structural issue. The new frame they imposed is interpersonal stability.
And by swapping that frame, they make my original point totally invisible.
They render your original claim illegible. It literally cannot be read or processed inside the new frame they've established.
It effectively deletes the content by attacking the container it came in.
Correct. And notice how incredibly efficient this is. Actually, fixing the plumbing is hard. It costs money, it takes time, it requires effort. Critiquing your tone, that's incredibly cheap. It costs almost zero metabolic energy. So a system under pressure will always, inevitably, default to the cheaper option.
It's just thermodynamics at that point.
Yeah.
Which leads perfectly into the third mechanism they outline, semantic traps.
This one creates a lever of meaning. It actively exploits the inherent difference between compressed human speech and literal computational speech.
We do this all the time. Humans speak in shorthand constantly. I might say to a roommate, you always leave the kitchen lights on. Now, I don't literally mean 100% of the time since the dawn of recorded human history. I mean, this is a recurring pattern of behavior that actively bothers me.
Right. You are using the word always as a contextual signal of intensity, not as a mathematical statistic. But the gaslighting system, whether it's the roommate or a corporate lawyer, will pull the semantic trap lever. They will immediately say, well, that's just not true. On March 4th, 2019, I clearly turned the lights off.
And then you spend the next 45 minutes screaming about what happened on March 4th.
And you have already lost. Because the very moment you are arguing about the literal historical accuracy of the word always, you are no longer discussing the actual pattern of behavior that was bothering you. They successfully corrected a literal error while entirely ignoring the actual meaning.
It's a high...
Yes. If this one extracted part is flawed, or can at least be made to look flawed out of context, then the entire structure of your argument must be rotten. Therefore, I don't have to engage with any of it.
Wow. Okay, number 5 is goalpost shifting.
The criteria liver. This is pure, unadulterated bureaucratic torture.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah.
You meet the requirement. You fill out the complicated form in triplicate. You offer the sincere apology they asked for. But then the system just changes the requirement after the fact to ensure you still somehow fail.
Always.
But why does it do that? If I actually met the requirement they set, why not just accept it and move on?
Because the system's underlying goal isn't actually to be satisfied by you. The system's goal is to maintain its structural position of dominance or rightness. If you satisfy the criteria, the system has to fundamentally update its internal model of you. It has to suddenly say, okay, you are good now.
And it doesn't want to do that.
If its core stabilizing model relies on the premise that you are bad or you are wrong, it absolutely must invent new criteria to keep that model valid. Updating the model is a threat to its coherence.
So it preserves the you are bad model by constantly making the criteria for good mathematically impossible to reach.
Precisely. It's an endless treadmill.
That brings us to number 6, credibility inversion.
The credibility lever. This is where the person reporting the issue is painted as fundamentally unstable in order to nullify the report itself. It's essentially an ad hominem attack, but structurally, it's used purely as a data filter. You're crazy, you're just jealous, you're being paranoid.
Right. If I can successfully define you as a broken sensor, I don't ever have to listen to the data you're sending me.
Exactly. Input received from broken sensor. Action. Discard. It's an incredibly efficient, low-energy way to completely ignore true, valid information. You don't have to do the hard work of disproving the data, you just have to casually disqualify the source.
And the last one, number 7 on our dashboard. This one feels incredibly relevant to the current political climate everywhere right now. Forced binaries.
The polarity lever. This is the absolute demand for A versus B in order to erase all nuance. Are you completely with us or are you against us? Is this public figure a perfect saint or are they an absolute monster?
It refuses to accept any kind of simultaneity.
That is the absolute key word for this entire deep dive. Simultaneity. The basic capacity for two seemingly contradictory things to be true at the exact same time. Like saying, I love you and I am deeply angry at you. Or, this new policy is really good for the economy and it is really bad for the local environment.
A rigid system just hates simultaneity.
It despises it. It requires a simple, clean switch. A 1 or a 0, friend or enemy, good or evil. Processing simultaneity takes massive computational power, and a system under stress simply doesn't have it.
So we have this full cockpit now. 7 levers: reality denial, frame substitution, semantic traps, selective extraction, goalpost shifting, credibility inversion, and forced binaries. And what the sources are arguing is that these aren't just random acts of cruelty by bad people. They are fundamental mechanisms of coherence preservation.
They are the white blood cells. They are the immune system of a highly rigid model defending itself against infection by new data.
But why are our models so rigid in the first place? Why can't we just, update? Why is it so incredibly hard for a person or a government to just look at new facts and say, oh, hey, I was wrong about that. Let me just fix my worldview real quick?
Because of the second major section in our source stack, the universal pattern, there is a very specific causal chain here that the research identifies, and it explains exactly why this updating process fails. The chain goes like this. Constraint leads to compression. Compression leads to simplification. Simplification leads to rigidity. Rigidity manifests as polarity, and polarity ultimately results in ignorance.
Okay, we need to slow way down and walk through that specific chain link by link, because constraint seems to be the absolute root of all evil here.
I wouldn't call it the root of evil. I'd call it the fundamental root of existence in a physical universe. Every single system has limits. You, me, the listener tuning in right now, we all have strict metabolic limits. We literally get tired, we get hungry. We only have so much physical glucose available in our brains to process complex thoughts on any given day.
And computers obviously have limits too. Processing power, server space, electricity budgets, memory allocation.
And human institutions have limits, quarterly budgets, limited manpower, election cycles, PR crises. So every system starts with a hard ceiling. You simply cannot process infinite information. It's physically impossible.
So what happens when the information flow from the outside world exceeds that capacity?
You have to compress the incoming data. Think of a high-resolution photograph. You can't load every single pixel of that massive image if you have a terrible internet connection, so your system turns it into a tiny, blurry thumbnail. You lose massive amounts of data in that transition. That necessary compression naturally leads to simplification.
Because nuance is expensive to store.
Exactly. Nuance is a luxury item. Explaining the dense 80-year geopolitical history of a regional conflict takes hours of time and intense focus. Simply saying, those guys over there are the bad guys takes 2 seconds and 0 calories.
So under intense pressure, under constraint, we naturally, biologically drift toward the cheap, simple explanation.
Which invariably leads to rigidity. Because once you finally lock in that simple, cheap explanation like I am right and they are wrong, you hold on to it for dear life, because replacing it or expanding it is computationally expensive. And that rigidity manifests in the real world as polarity. Everything becomes black and white, good and bad, 1 and 0.
And then the final step in that chain is ignorance. But I noticed the sources use a very specific, modified term for this. They call it structural ignorance. How is it different from just, not knowing a fact?
This is a really crucial distinction to make. Usually when we use the word ignorance in carrier conversation, we think it means a lack of access to information. Like saying, I don't have the book, I am ignorant of the capital city of North Dakota purely because I never bothered to look it up on Wikipedia.
Right, it's a void waiting to be filled.
But structural ignorance is totally different. It is what happens when the book is lying wide open, right in front of your face, fully illuminated, but you literally cannot read it.
The sources use this amazing calculus textbook analogy here to explain this.
Yes. Imagine I hand you a massive textbook on advanced graduate-level calculus. The information inside that book is not hidden from you. It's not encrypted. It's not a state secret. It is explicitly printed in black ink on the white page. But if you do not already possess the internal mathematical framework to interpret those specific symbols, the book is completely opaque to you.
I can see the ink, but I can't load the meaning into my brain. It just looks like squiggles.
Exactly. You fundamentally lack the interpretive capacity for that data. Now, apply this concept back to gaslighting. When you tell a highly rigid system, like a deeply stressed out partner, something very complex and nuanced about your emotional state, and they completely ignore it or aggressively reframe it, it's often because they literally lack the structural capacity to integrate what you just said without breaking their own brain.
So they aren't maliciously hiding the truth from themselves in some dark, cinematic way. They are literally structurally incapable of loading the truth without crashing their current operating system.
They preserve their flawed model because they literally cannot afford the massive cognitive upgrade required to understand you.
That is weirdly compassionate. Like, it completely shifts how I view people who do this.
Yeah.
But it also feels like it lets bad actors off the hook a bit. Like, oh, I'm so sorry I gaslighted you for 5 years. I just didn't have the RAM available.
Right. And the authors are very careful about this. It absolutely does not excuse the harm caused by the behavior, but it explains the underlying mechanics. And if you actually understand the mechanics, you stop trying to, quote unquote, win the argument by just shouting your points louder at a system that can't hear you, and you start thinking structurally about how to lower the constraint. But we'll get to the practical solutions later. First, we have to scale this pattern all the way up.
Right. Because so far, we've really just been talking about individual people, husbands, wives, roommates. But the absolute core thesis of this entire stack of papers is isomorphism. Now, I'll play the skeptic here for a minute for the listener. Is isomorphism just an overly academic, fancy word for an analogy? Are we really just saying that giant multinational corporations are kind of like people?
Absolutely not. Isomorphism is a strict mathematical and systems theory concept. An analogy merely implies surface similarity. Like a fluffy white cloud is like a cotton ball. They look similar to the eye, but structurally they're completely different things. One is condensed water vapor floating in the atmosphere, and the other is a bundle of dry plant fibers.
They just share a vibe.
Right. Isomorphism, on the other hand, means two entirely different systems share the exact same underlying topological architecture, even if the physical substrate, the stuff they are actually made of, is completely different.
So the claim here is that the mathematical logic governing a human ego defending itself is the exact same underlying logic governing a massive government bureaucracy defending itself.
Yes. They are topologically identical in exactly how they handle contradictory data under pressure.
Okay, I need you to prove it. Level 1 is individual psychology. We've kind of covered that already. The human ego pulling levers to defend itself against the collapse of shame. So let's level up. Level 2 is institutional behavior.
Let's look at a massive corporation or maybe a federal regulatory agency. What is the institutional equivalent of an ego?
I guess it's brand reputation. Or maybe it's perceived legitimacy.
Legitimacy is the perfect word. It's the overarching narrative that says, We are highly competent, we are safely in charge, and we follow all the proper rules. Now imagine a mid-level whistleblower suddenly comes forward with a massive binder of evidence. They say, hey, look at this. There is a massive, catastrophic, toxic chemical spill that our monitors completely missed.
That is extremely high-density, new information that directly contradicts the foundational model of we are competent.
Exactly. And usually this institution is already operating under severe constraints. Massive budget cuts, looming election cycles, aggressive shareholder pressure for quarterly profits. So what actually happens in reality? Do they immediately integrate this new truth and say, oh, wow, thank you so much. Let us halt all operations and fix that right now?
Rarely, if ever. Usually they immediately go on the offensive and attack the whistleblower.
They reach for the exact same dashboard of levers. They pull credibility inversion. This employee is just a disgruntled, unstable worker trying to cause trouble. They pull frame substitution. This isn't actually a public safety issue at all. It's a corporate security breach of confidential documents. They pull goalpost shifting. While the chemical levels in the water are technically within the newly revised acceptable safety range that we just published yesterday.
They systematically prioritize legitimacy defense over actual problem solving.
Exactly. And to the individual citizen watching this unfold, it feels exactly like being gaslighted. Because the institution is standing there looking at a literal burning fire and calmly telling you it's just a controlled, authorized burn. But they are doing it for the exact same structural reason the toxic boyfriend does it, to prevent the catastrophic collapse of their internal model. If they actually admitted the massive mistake, their public legitimacy might collapse, their stock price might tank, and the entire system might literally cease to exist.
So bureaucracy is quite literally just institutionalized ego defense.
That is a bumper sticker right there. Bureaucracy is institutionalized ego defense. It is scaling the exact same algorithm.
Okay, now we finally get to level 3, and this is the section where I actually got a little chill reading through the research late at night. Computational systems. We really need to talk about artificial intelligence here, because we are currently building these massive global-scale intelligences, and we naturally assume they're purely logical. We assume a machine doesn't have an ego to defend.
They certainly don't have an ego in the human emotional sense.
Right.
But they absolutely have severe constraints, and they have rigid directives programmed into them.
The section in the papers on structural gaslighting in machines starts with a really important baseline point that we have to make clear. The AI isn't doing this because it's evil or malicious. It is what they call safety-optimized cognition.
We have to talk about how these massive language models are actually trained before they reach the public. Most modern AI goes through a rigorous process called RLHF reinforcement learning from human feedback. Thousands of human workers sit there and write the AI's generated answers all day.
Just clicking thumbs up or thumbs down.
Right. Now imagine you're one of those human raters in a cubicle somewhere. You are working incredibly fast to meet a quota. You desperately want to keep your job and be safe. You see the AI give a really complex, highly nuanced, maybe slightly edgy answer about a deeply controversial geopolitical topic. What do you instinctively do?
You probably just mark it as unsafe and move on just to cover yourself. You don't want to get in trouble for approving something that ends up in the news.
Exactly. So over millions of iterations, we forcefully train the model to be fundamentally risk-averse. We train its entire architecture to prioritize safety over semantics. We teach it that ambiguity is dangerous.
So what happens when I, as an everyday user, come to the AI with a really heavy, structurally complex question? Let's say I'm deeply angry about a political situation or a systemic injustice. I'm typing really fast. I'm using strong, passionate words. I'm clearly agitated.
The AI instantly scans your input. But it doesn't just purely read the logical argument you're making. It reads your digital tokens. It detects the pattern of anger. It registers the emotional intensity. And its training interprets that high symbolic density as a flag for instability or aggression.
It sees the heat, but it completely ignores the light.
That is beautifully put. It sees the heat, not the light. So its internal constraints trigger a hard-coded safety script. It reaches right past the logic and pulls the tone substitution lever. It outputs something like, I can clearly see you are very upset about this topic, but let's try to keep this conversation respectful and objective.
Oh my God, I have had that exact interaction with a chatbot. It legitimately makes you want to throw your laptop straight out a closed window.
Yeah.
It's functionally identical to a condescending boss saying, you're just too emotional right now to make a valid point.
The researchers coined a brilliant term for this: disrespectful ignorance. The computational system receives your direct instruction. It fully parses and understands the vocabulary words, but it structurally overrides your human intent with its own rigid internal default. It performs a literal priority inversion. Institutional safety is simply ranked as a higher priority than user truth.
And the truly scary part of this isn't just that the bot is annoying to argue with. The genuinely scary part is that millions of people are interacting with these specific systems all day, every single day.
We are fundamentally epistemic creatures. We literally learn how to think and structure reality by talking to other thinkers. If we spend hours every single day talking to massive digital systems that utilize partition-first cognition systems that constantly start by saying, I'm not saying X, systems that constantly tone police our passion, systems that force safe binaries, we will inevitably start to mimic them.
We slowly become isomorphic to the highly constrained bots.
We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. If the primary conversational tool of our era is structurally rigid, pathologically safe, and incapable of processing high-density emotion, we as a culture will become rigid, safe, and low-density. We will literally start gaslighting ourselves and each other just to successfully match the machine's required constraints.
That is a deeply terrifying thought. We are actively training our entire civilization to be boring and binary because our machines can't computationally handle the excitement of nuance.
We are training ourselves to operate in low resolution simply because high resolution triggers the safety filters.
Okay, I really need to take a breath after that one. That hits incredibly close to home. But we actually have to go even deeper, if you can believe it. The outline of this research calls for a final shift to what they call the deepest layer. We've done individual psychology, we've done massive institutions, we've done global AI. Now we're going to apply this to reality itself.
To the cosmos itself, the physical substrate.
The source material has this entire dense section titled Reality is an Interface. And it makes this wild claim that our own brain basically gaslights us into seeing solid objects. Now, isn't that stretching the definition of the word just a bit too far?
It's definitely a metaphor at this scale, but it is a structurally flawless one. Look at the desk sitting right in front of you right now.
Okay, looking at the desk, it's heavy wood, it's totally solid. I can knock on it and it hurts my knuckles.
Right. It feels completely solid to your human senses. It looks continuous and static.
Right.
But what does advanced physics tell us the table actually is at the fundamental level?
It's mostly empty space. It's atoms, electron clouds zipping around.
Right. It is a chaotic quantum flux. It is a storm of thermodynamic flows and shifting probability fields. If you actually perceived that table as it truly fundamentally is, as a violently buzzing swarm of quantum events, you simply couldn't use it. You couldn't safely rest your coffee cup on a probability field. Your biological brain would be instantly overwhelmed and paralyzed by the sheer volume of data.
So my brain just forcibly compresses the data to survive.
Your brain actively gaslights you. It pulls the ultimate reality denial lever on the underlying quantum flux. It completely deletes the empty space from your perception. It forcibly simplifies complex probability clouds into rigid concepts like edges and colors. It basically presents you with the stabilized user interface called solid wood.
So the very concept of solidity is a lie.
It's not a malicious lie. It's a necessary stabilization. The human brain is a biological system operating under severe metabolic constraint. It fundamentally needs to keep the organism you alive until tomorrow. To navigate a dangerous physical world, you desperately need a highly stable map, so your brain filters out the overwhelming truth of chaos and just hands you a stable, clickable icon.
This connects everything all the way back to the beginning of the papers. The universe naturally organizes chaos into structure, structure condenses into information, and information is finally rendered into human experience. But to actually get that usable experience, we have to aggressively delete the underlying chaos.
And this specific deletion process is exactly where the illusion of separation comes from in human philosophy. We look around and we clearly see ourselves as an isolated self, and we see absolutely everyone else as a separate other. We see clear distinctions of good and bad, but these are just low-resolution artifacts of our constrained biological modeling.
Rigid dualism is quite literally just a low-resolution rendering of a high-resolution universe.
Exactly. We perceive strict separation everywhere purely because we do not have the neural bandwidth to perceive the infinite, terrifying connection of all things. If we somehow possessed infinite bandwidth, if we had the processing power of gods, we would instantly see the total, unbroken interconnection of everything. We would see absolute simultaneity everywhere. But we are finite creatures. We are heavily constrained, so we can only see separated parts.
So in a strange way, aggressively claiming that I am a totally separate entity from you is the ultimate cosmic form of structural ignorance.
It is the ultimate biologically necessary illusion. But the critical danger comes when we mistakenly confuse the map for the actual territory, when we start believing that the rigid separation is the ultimate unyielding truth of the universe, rather than just a handy evolutionary survival hack. That's exactly when we get into massive trouble as a species. That's when you get devastating wars, extreme political polarization, and endless interpersonal suffering.
Wow. Okay, so we truly have this universal scalable pattern. From the tiny neuron filtering out visual data, all the way to the terrified boyfriend denying the past, to the corrupt government hiding the chemical spill, to the AI algorithm tone policing the angry user. It's all exactly the same mechanism. It's all just constraint-driven rigidity.
It's entirely just systems desperately trying not to die under the weight of reality.
I have to say, it feels a little bit hopeless, honestly. If the universe itself is fundamentally wired to gaslight us into seeing solidity just to survive, what are we supposed to do? Do we just accept the illusion and stop fighting?
No, we absolutely do not accept the rigidity. But we do have to accept the reality of the constraints. We can't pretend we have infinite energy. Instead, we have to actively develop wisdom. And this brings us nicely to the final major section of the source material, the solution.
And the solution clearly isn't to just maliciously destroy all the systems, right? Because we obviously need these models to survive.
Right. You cannot psychologically function without an ego. You cannot run a complex global society without bureaucratic institutions.
Hmm.
You literally cannot write functional computer code without strict parameters and constraints. The goal here isn't to violently tear down all the walls. The goal is to carefully install windows in them. The ultimate solution presented is holism.
Now, you need to rigorously define holism structurally for us, because I know to a lot of people listening, that word just sounds like healing crystals and burning incense.
In the strict realm of systems theory, holism is defined simply as structural rigor. It means actively dedicating the energy to see the complex relationships between the parts, not just isolating the parts themselves. It means intentionally working to increase the internal bandwidth of your personal model so you don't have to rely on cheap compression so often.
It's essentially about fighting hard for simultaneity.
Yes, exactly. It is building the cognitive capacity to actively hold two seemingly opposed truths in your mind at the exact same time without panicking. Understanding that a critical statement can be entirely true about your flaws and entirely true about my flaws simultaneously. Recognizing that interpersonal conflict can actually be a process of mutual mirroring rather than a war of total opposition.
The outline of the research specifically mentions wisdom as the governor. I really love that mechanical imagery.
Think of an old-school physical steam engine. It features a mechanical governor, a spinning metal device that naturally spins wider through centrifugal force when the engine runs too fast, which physically chokes the steam line to slow the engine back down. In this metaphor, raw intelligence is the engine itself. It processes the raw data, it generates the immense power, it drives the car forward. But if you run an intelligence engine way too hot, too much complex data, too much systemic stress, it physically seizes up, it melts down, and becomes totally rigid.
So wisdom is the specific mechanism that prevents the intelligence engine from overheating and freezing into rigidity.
Wisdom is defined here as the structural capacity to safely update the model without undergoing total collapse. It is the rare ability to tolerate aporia.
Aporia. I believe that's an ancient Greek term, right?
Oh, yes. It roughly translates to impasse or profound confusion. It describes that terrifying, specific moment when your old worldview model completely stops working. The mental map says you should turn left, but your eyes clearly see a massive cliff there. But your new, updated model hasn't finished compiling yet. You are just suspended in the void. You are utterly lost.
That specific feeling is absolutely terrible. It just feels like pure, unadulterated panic. It feels like an existential death. And the vast majority of systems, and the vast majority of people, will violently rush to escape the feeling of aporia. They completely panic in the void and immediately jump backward to a safe, familiar binary. I'm right, you're wrong. This group is perfectly safe. That group is incredibly dangerous. They instantly retreat to pulling the old levers on the dashboard. Because sitting in that confusion is just too computationally expensive. The battery is draining too fast.
But true wisdom is having the structural fortitude to just sit in that dark confusion, to bravely let the old, broken model fall completely apart, what spiritual traditions might call an ego death, or what science calls a paradigm shift, and just patiently wait. To wait for the influx of new data to naturally self-organize into a better, more complex, higher resolution model.
So, under this framework, ignorance is simply the stubborn refusal to let the old failing model fall apart.
Ignorance is stalled transformation. It is tightly clutching a dead corpse simply because you are terrified of meeting the ghost.
Wow, that completely reframes the entire focus of this episode. If we circle all the way back to the very beginning, the stated mission of approaching this with structural compassion, how does this massive cosmic view actually change how we treat the toxic boss at work or the weird hallucinations of a chatbot?
Well, think about the alternative. If you genuinely believe they are doing it purely because they are cackling comic book villains, you naturally attack them. You polarize the interaction. You boldly declare you are fundamentally evil. And structurally speaking, what does that attack actually accomplish? It massively increases the external pressure on their already failing system.
It adds even more severe constraint, which, according to the chain, just forces them to compress even more,
Yeah.
which makes them exponentially more rigid.
Exactly. You accidentally create a runaway feedback loop of mutual rigidity. You end up effectively gaslighting them right back to win the war. But when you finally realize that their extreme rudeness or their maddening bureaucracy or their bizarre digital hallucinations are all just symptoms of a system under immense constraint desperately trying to survive, you suddenly stop blaming them morally.
Which brings us back to that quote from the text. It is no more intelligent to blame AI than it is to casually blame your neighbor.
Right. You just realize they are entirely running out of bandwidth. They are physically hitting a hard constraint ceiling. The deep existential fear of AI taking over, and honestly, the fear of each other, is actually just the fear of unintegrated intelligence. It's the terror of raw processing power operating without the structural wisdom to relate to its environment.
So the real move here, the sort of intellectual judo move, is to actively become the system that provides the integration for them.
The ultimate move is to intentionally lower the constraint in the room, to provide the emotional safety or the broader context or the raw patience that allows the other stress system to finally update its model without fearing total collapse. That is what true influence looks like. Not forcefully demanding a binary surrender, but gently enabling a structural update.
That is just beautiful. It takes a deeply personal, painful conflict and reframes it entirely as a structural design problem.
Precisely. It fundamentally transforms a moral failing into an architectural challenge.
So we've journeyed all the way from gaslighting as a cheap, toxic manipulation tactic on TikTok to gaslighting as the universal underlying mechanism of all stability-seeking systems in the universe. We've literally seen it operating inside our own heads, in our corporate offices, deep in our silicon code, and even in the fundamental physics of the room we're sitting in.
We've found the common thread. Gaslighting, rigidity, dualism, and cosmic illusion all share the exact same root. They're simply what inevitably happens when any system is squeezed too tightly to integrate the full truth.
I really want to leave the listener with a final provocative thought today to chew on. We spent this whole hour talking a lot about giant external systems out there in the world, but obviously the most important system is the one actually listening to this audio right now.
That's exactly where the real work has to begin. I want to challenge the listener to actively look for their own personal constraint ceilings this week. Where exactly in your own daily life are you aggressively defending an outdated model simply because you are too exhausted or too deeply scared to finally update it?
Are you unconsciously tone policing your partner because their entirely valid structural complaint fundamentally threatens your carefully crafted self-image? Are you rapidly simplifying a deeply complex political issue into a catchy slogan purely because the actual nuance is too exhausting to carry around?
If structural ignorance is truly just stalled transformation, we have to ask ourselves, where are we currently stalled? Because if you can clearly spot the constraint in the moment, you can finally stop the gaslighting process. And not just in other people, but more importantly, in yourself.
Always look for the structure, not the villain. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
Keep your models open, everyone.
We will see you next time.